DYCD, Barbershop Talks, Fatherhood Matters, Diverse. Hey yo, these is Barbershop Talks where the fathers pop off, brag about relationships and argue about sports. Every topic's a favorite, is how we plot course toward changes. It all begins with dialogue and patience. Barbershop Talk, so let's chop it up, boys. Barbershop Talk, so let's chop it up, boys. Barbershop Talk, so let's chop it up, boys. Chop it up, boys. Chop it up.
Good evening and welcome back to many of you to DYCD Barbershop Talks. I'm Mike Bobbitt.
Give me a second. My sound cord came out the back of my computer.
Okay. All right. We'll get you. I'm Mike Bobbitt. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Community Development at DYCD. And with me is Scott Leach, the Director of our Fatherhood Initiative. Scott is managing with technical difficulties, and these are the things that sometimes happen. But in the interest of keeping your attention, we wanted to make sure we went live as close to 6 o'clock as possible. So Scott will be kind of testing the equipment as we go. But rest assured, I got you there. Okay, cool.
Yep, I'm back on.
So Scott, how are you doing? You must be wrestling with a whole lot of stuff all at the same time. So I appreciate you logging on time.
Yes, it's trying to get back to the new normal as we have been talking about, or we're going to talk about today. I was running around to all my sites today trying to see him. And I was running back from Brooklyn from one of my sites, and seeing everybody and seeing programs to see if the back end services as we're trying to get back to our new way of working. And once again, bringing the economy back here in the city and bringing things back. We're trying to get all that stuff back up to par. And it was just a little difficult. A lot of people on the highway, a lot of people on the roads, which is good. That means we are getting back to what we are known as normal.
I know, I'm with you. I was in Brooklyn earlier today too, and I usually stay here in the office to make sure I have the best connection possible. But I was out in the field. I was going to visit some of the programs as well. And I said, let me hightail it and get back. Train was crowded. It was moving though, so that's a good thing. While I was waiting for you to log on, I was talking to some of the guests who will be with us this evening, and they were remarking, and I wanted to kind of at the outset talk about this. We've been doing the Barbershop Talks for a while, and we don't always remind people of how we got started and why we got started. I always like to tell the panelists we're inviting people what the point of it is and how it started, but I think it makes a lot of sense because of this particular conversation that we're having. You're talking about getting used to the new normal or adapting to the new normal. So just for a second, reminding folks that we created the Barbershop Talks because we were faced with anything but normal circumstances. Yeah. When we had this international coronavirus pandemic and we went into quarantine, and you, Scott, and some of the other staff were saying, how can we reach out to folks who, if they knew a little bit more about the services that DYC makes available, they might want to take action and kind of step into that next step to help themselves out. And we were in a whole lot of other conversations with people about the coronavirus itself, like test and trace, and how can you find out if you got it or if you don't got it, and where are the vaccines, and debunking myths about vaccination. But the other thing that I talk about, and I don't always bring this into the barbershop, but I think it's really important, is we had the idea to do this, but when we really started doing it in earnest, it was right after the George Floyd murder. And not only were we doing the quarantine, but we also had a curfew in New York City. And that really was the kicker, and why we started doing it in the evening. A lot of our services may be provided during the day or during the afternoon, but we wanted to start doing these conversations in the evening when folks who maybe were unused to being cooped up in the house. And we wanted to introduce some positive and constructive conversations for folks who are cooped up in the house. And we know who our target audience is, right? Because it's a barbershop, right? So we're trying to talk to men in the community about conversations we think are relevant to men in the community. And so who knew back in 2020 that here we would be in 2022 still having these conversations. But the response we get from you and from people who continue to follow and people who look at the archived conversations on YouTube suggests that we should keep going. So here we are, we keep going. So last year, as the city was really starting to open up in the way it was, we talked about getting ready for the fall and what does the new normal look like. And a year later, we're back in that same conversation because this year doesn't even look like last year. There's still a lot of things to adapt and to change around and get used to and change to. So I was just laughing when you're talking about your driving stories and laughing about my train stories. I missed my connection. So I actually overshot the office and I had to hustle to get back on the 405 to come back down. I'm just like, try to be there by 6, try to be there by 6. You know, like this is how it goes nowadays, right? Right, Scott?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I missed one of my blocks. I had to double back myself. It's funny because when you're rushing, you miss these little things that you normally would just be able to do. But once again, with this conversation, as we moving back into the fall and we're moving back into more of a situation, and especially with all of our young people going back to school, it's really important for us to start focusing and thinking about how we are really putting back our lives into a normal pattern than what we've done. And once again, maybe almost picking up from when the pandemic hit that we're getting back to. And, I'm trying not to even be comfortable with saying the new normal. We just need to be normal, you know, because I think there's always something new that's going to happen, even when you just have a regular life history, life going on. And we have to just be normal. And but we have to also recognize the trauma. And I know that we have a couple of doctors on here who are going to talk about trauma and the trauma we have to face and really talk about. And one of the things, the reason why we have this barbershop, because men don't talk about trauma. Men very rarely even open up and talk about what's going on, and even say about their feelings or discuss those things. And trying to find safe spaces so men can really have conversation. Not only just men, but now we know that all of our people, we all need to have safe spaces where we can have a conversation, which is healthy. I'm even learning myself, even still now, how having conversation is healthy, to be able to say what's on your mind, to be able to try to express that feeling or those things that are going on. But I'm not going to keep talking because we have some really good experts on. I don't know if we got a chance to introduce all of our experts yet.
No, let's do it now. Let's do it
Okay.
right now. So let's trade off. So one person that I'm thrilled to have come back to the barbershop is Caleres Salas Ramirez. You know, and you said we have a couple of doctors here. One of the things that I love about Dr. Salas Ramirez coming back is if you've been following us for a while, right when they introduced the availability of the vaccine to youth, she was on the panel that was part of Youth Vax Week in New York City, and she had a lot of great information, both as someone who's a medical professional, but also as a parent and somebody who has connections to the DOE as well as the CUNY School of Medicine. So we want to welcome Dr. Salis Ramirez back to the barbershop. Hello, say hello, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
A woman of a few words, right? Let me do one other and then I'll pass it over to you, Scott, right? So some more medical firepower. We have Simba Ige, who's an assistant commissioner for the Bureau of Health Equity Capacity Building in the city's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. I've had the pleasure of meeting with this sister several times because as part of the racial equity work of the city of New York, she was heading the Vaccine Equity Committee. So we wanted to make sure that awareness of how to get vaccinated for everyone who wanted to get vaccinated was being dispersed and people were being attended to in an equitable way. And those are some of the best policy and practitioner conversations that I've been in, where we would look at what's happening kind of in real time and make change the next week, and then look at some more data and then make change the next week. So I want to thank you publicly for helping run those meetings, and I thank you for being available. Why don't you say hello to the people? Welcome to the barbershop.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you everyone for having me. It's a real pleasure. My job is to look out for Black and Brown folks in New York, making sure nobody is dying from a preventable cause. And so I am here to answer any questions you have. What is it that people of color need to look out for? How do we stay healthy? And how do we look out for our neighbors, look out for our businesses? So don't be shy today. I'm here and with a lot of information to help.
Thank
And
you. So I got to introduce a couple. You introduce a couple, Scott.
okay, and I'm gonna bring on this sister. She's a real good sister to me. She has been doing some really helpful things for me. Back in the day, when every time I call over to DOE and ask something, Tessa Wilson is right there for me. She'll pick up the phone and she'll answer it and say, "Scott, I'll get it done for you. I get it done." But now she's out in the community and helping families in the school system and really doing the yeoman's work that she has been blessed to do. And I want to introduce Tessa Wilson because I really appreciate the things she has done for me in the past. Tessa?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with this esteemed panel once again and talk about getting back into school. And I thank you for the invitation once again. I look forward to us sharing lots of information, learning and growing and affecting change. That's what we do.
Well, the next guest I'm going to introduce is a brother. I think we're going to have to give him a seat here in the barbershop, Mike. Clement. He's here right at DYCD. I'm talking to him, getting ready to do some real work tomorrow morning. We got some things that we're going to dive in. We didn't even tell you all about this stuff. We're getting ready to kick off with working together. But really dynamite guy. I found out a lot about him, and he's a father, and he's doing some great things, and he's really excited about this work. So, Clement, introduce yourself.
Scott, thank you very much. I look forward to our conversation tomorrow. My name is Clement Ramirez. I'm a program manager here at DYCD. And yeah, I'm a father. I've gone through it. I'm going through it currently, and looking forward to just talk about it, have some good conversations.
All right, back to you, Mike.
All right, back to me. And along with Clemente, we have another colleague from DYCD who is also part of our after school system, which we call Compass, Comprehensive After School System, Roberto Ayala. Welcome to the barbershop. Say hello to the folks.
Hey, everybody. Good evening. I'm so excited to be a part of the barbershop tonight. And so just a little bit about myself, right? So I'm a product of DYCD program as I was a participant as a child. I started working at DYCD programs as an SYAP participant. I ran program, and here I am at DYCD as a program manager. And so I'm excited to have those fruitful conversations about, what the school year is going to look like for our CBOs and just parents and everyone that has a stake in our children's lives. So I'm really excited for this conversation.
Glad to have you, and I like how you show up. Roberto helps activate a lot of our agency-wide campaigns, Spring Into Health, really connecting to physical and mental well-being around our program. So appreciate you. Next, we are happy to be able to welcome back Arlise Ford. Arlise Ford is the Executive Director of Head Start with the New York City Department of Education, Division of Early Childhood Education. So welcome back, Arlise.
Thank you. So excited to be here. The barbershop is really dear to me. I always say I'm a bona fide daddy's girl. And so the fatherhood initiatives and the fatherhood work and Head Start, as many know, is a pillar of the work in which we do. And so excited to be here and happy to talk about all things getting back.
Very nice. Thank you, and welcome back. We've got a few more people to introduce. One new to the barbershop, and I want to thank my colleagues in our Literacy and Immigrant Services for making this introduction. Charlotte Henson Butler is the Interim University Director of Student Recruitment at the City University of New York. So thank you for bringing that CUNY knowledge and insight. Charlotte, welcome to the barbershop.
Thank you very much for having me this evening. I'm looking forward to learning as much as I can and also sharing.
All right, Scott, you got a couple more?
Yes, we have Yvette. Yvette, how you doing now? Yvette's here with us. I think this is your first time with the barbershop talk. Am I correct, Yvette?
No, this is my second time.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I was here in the fall. I work with Lisa White Consultant Agency. We work with DYCD. We help program directors in order to hire, retain, and to give them a broader spectrum on how to manage programs through the HR spectrum and with their program supervisors and directors.
So with that said, Lisa's been with us several times. So I don't know, we have a salon over here sitting in the back door. Lisa's back here with the salon, working with us here. But here's Lisa. How you doing,
Hi,
Lisa?
everybody. I'm real excited to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. We have a great group, so I'm really excited to hear what everybody's going to talk about and how we can support you guys out here.
I'm feeling your eyeglasses too.
Oh, thank you. All right.
They're popping on screen.
See, last but not least, right? This is one of the first gentlemen I met when I came to DYCD. I'll let you do the introduction, but I want to big up him as you introduce our final panelist, Scott.
Oh, definitely. This is my big brother in many different ways. At work, actually, I probably wouldn't even be in the fatherhood field if it wasn't for this gentleman. I was leaving one career, and he said, "Hey, man, I think I got a spot for you over here at this agency. I think you would be excellent for it." And he brought me over to Forestdale and said, "I think you should interview for this job, working with fathers." And Rodney Pride has been a pillar in my life ever since. He's groomed me. He's beat me up. He prays for me. He hugs me. He loves me. He talks to me. He may not. I mean, when I call him, he's like that person. When you call him, he may not be there right there, but he's right on time. He usually comes just in time with me. So I want to thank Rodney publicly. And every time I see him, I want people to know that this is a real, genuine guy. You get what you see, and there's no bones about it. It's gonna be right between the eyes. You can't take it. Get out of the way. I'm gonna introduce my big brother, Rodney Pride.
Thank you, Scott, for the gracious introduction. Thank you, Mike, for having me back on the Barbershop. It's always good to be here with you and your distinguished panel. Being in the barbershop is a real feel, and you've created an environment that makes it feel as though you're actually in the barbershop, right? And the only thing that will slow me down is there's some things that we say in the barbershop. I have to really, guard my tongue a little bit because we are in the presence of ladies and so forth, right? And maybe they talk about the same thing in the beauty parlor, but in a different kind of way. But I'll do the best I can to keep it real and support my dear friends here at DYCD.
So we're going to jump right in. So we're talking about getting back, and we're getting back in many different ways. I think that, and Mike, I want to be correct. I'm sure we've been back in our office almost a year and a half, almost 2 now, that we have been really back in the office 5 days a week. I know it started off like, you hear the buzz. We're coming back maybe 1 day a week, maybe 3 days a week. And then we got the call and said, show up Monday through Friday. See ya. It was like, just all in,
acceleration. So I'd say about from May to September last year, it was 1 day a week. And September was like, flip the switch, 5 days a week. There you go. Yes.
And sometimes it's just good. Just pull the Band-Aid off. Just pull it off. So with that happening, and I'm going to just throw it out to any of the panelists, how did you all feel about, going back? And once again, those who are fully back, because I think by this time, almost everybody is really fully back. How is that happening in your neck of the woods, at your job, at your workplace, even in your house? How's it doing? Because now that even our students are back in school fully, how's that happening for you? Anybody want to jump in first?
Yeah, I can say that we're very excited that in New York City, as of today, 98% of adult New Yorkers have received at least 1 dose of the vaccine. 89% are fully vaccinated, and I think we can clap. And that is across board. So that is really, really remarkable. I remember April 8, 2020, there were 800 deaths per day. And now we are at less than 5 deaths related to COVID in a week. So we have made a lot of progress. So we're very excited that people are getting vaccinated. Remember, there is a booster now. COVID is not a one and done kind of illness. You can get COVID more than once. And so the vaccines are also keeping up with the threat. So there are more aggressive variants of COVID about. And now there is a stronger vaccine available. So if you receive your shot, less than 2 months ago, please go get the updated booster. And for good measure, take it along with the flu shot. You can take both at the same time, cover all the bases, and you're good for the fall. And the kids too, they can get protected with the updated booster.
But Doc, I just heard that the president said COVID is over with.
Oh, don't we wish? Well, I like the numbers. As of today, we still have 1,800 cases of COVID per day in New York City alone. Now, I don't think that means COVID is over. COVID, we have less cases than we did before, but it is still here. And one thing we have learned about this virus, it has humbled all of us. So every time it's like whack-a-mole, every time we think we have things under control, boom, something happens. So we're not taking any chances this time, especially if you have older ones. Do not take any chances, take all the precautions. We know better, let's do better.
I do want to take that moment to acknowledge the dramatic turnaround, as you said, in terms of the rate of vaccination. And then let's give ourselves a tiny, tiny pat on the back that we've played a small role in helping encourage people to at least give serious thought if they were unsure they want to get vaccinated, to get the facts for themselves. So only a small measure of credit, but great credit goes to you and many other colleagues who've been having these meetings into the community-based organizations, the faith-based organizations that have been helping lead the charge along with the city. But you're right. I'm sorry, someone else wanted to jump in. Go for it.
Can I piggyback a little bit? It's
Please.
interesting that we say those numbers, because yesterday almost 1,700 COVID cases were logged in our New York City public schools. Sure. So I want to make sure that while we're still celebrating what adults have done, what grown-ups have done, we still protect children. Right. We have a very low vaccination rate, particularly in our very young children, and we're seeing those cases. So we still have to support our communities in this conversation. We're not over the hump at all. And we still have roughly across the country 3,000 plus people dying every week. So 2 weeks ago, we commemorated 9/11, where we lost 3,000 people in New York City. We're still losing 3,000 people per week in this country. And we can't take those numbers lightly. So while we want to celebrate the wins, we still want to educate folks on mitigation measures, on making sure that they understand the risks, and making sure that they understand that we don't know what reinfections are going to do, or when is it going to be the moment that you get an infection and that results in long COVID. We're seeing more and more cases. And so we just want to make sure that we continue this collective responsibility that I think a lot of us have really taken to heart, that we have to protect each other, particularly in our communities where we've seen thousands of children lose caretakers. In our New York City public schools, almost 9,000 kids started this year with having lost a caretaker. And we also had over 9,000 cases of families that were charged with educational neglect and investigated by CPS. So all of these things are coming into play as we're going back into school buildings and reconnecting with society, and really thinking about how we're going to continue to protect each other, not just with COVID, but monkeypox and polio are also showing up in our communities. So yay, absolutely. But we got to keep an eye, because things can get really complicated.
Can I jump in? Because I want to definitely support what Mike and Dr. Ramirez are saying, right? Because I think one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves as community leaders and mental health experts is to encourage the need for self-care, right? How, as you were saying originally, Mike, give ourselves a pat on the back. It's difficult, right? And it's so difficult that sometimes we forget the fact that we have moved the needle, right? We moved it a long way. Now, to Dr. Ramirez's point, right? As a community organizer, somebody who is in the thick of it all, especially in the urban centers, when I hear this data about 98% of the people having been vaccinated, it makes me wonder, Scott, because we live in Southeast Queens, areas that are quote unquote quite affluent. But when you look at the CDEC charts on where hot zones are, you sure would be surprised to know that some of the districts and zip codes that we live in, supposedly, quote unquote, some of the most affluent in the country are well below the citywide rate. And so, you know, we, Scott and Mike, we do a heavy lift in schools, as Dr. Ramirez was talking about. We just had all those kids that were dropped off on us as part of the asylum program, right? So schools are already talking about now, how do we ensure that those kids are safe, as well as our kids? And, you know, so there's always that push, right? And when I go in and look at my own zip code of a very affluent neighborhood, 78% in an orange zone, who are these people, right? And so, you know, as Dr. Ramirez is saying, you know, don't take an eye off that ball, right? Wherever there's an opportunity to go into a school with PPE and do some targeted kind of outreach to ensure that our kids are safe, wherever we go, if there's not a conversation in programming around what will be your health and safety protocols, then you are missing something in the conversation and programming. So I know, Scott, you're going to be going into where we're at and where we need to go and some of the things that we need to do differently. But as someone who, you know, is invested in policy and programming, design and capacity are important. And if you don't start your conversation today with me around health and safety protocols, I don't want to hear from you, you know, because our kids are, it's imperative that we have our families and children be safe. We cannot go back to that social isolation that our kids went through. I'm convinced that we robbed them of a portion of their childhood, and that can never happen. We can work from home. I can work from home and get more done than I ever did going into the office. But our kids, absolutely no way. They have to have that kind of social construct where they're going to be able to grow up and be socially viable. So, you know, I mean, you know, I just want to get off it.
Well
No,
said.
no, but I want to stick on it because one thing, and once again, so I'm a new granddad, so and I have
Congrats, brother.
grandkids that they're just they're going to kindergarten. They hadn't, you know, their kindergarten years were not with children, you know, and they're struggling, having to leave their safety nest to go somewhere where we think like, well, kids go and they get used to each other, and having to learn to share, having to learn to socialize, having to really speak to you, and you just can't turn the iPad off because you're in real time with people. Is anybody dealing with that same situation, or figure out how do we?
I was just talking to a mom in my community. I'm friendly with the mother and the father. These two boys. The older son just started the 4th grade. The youngest son is just starting the 1st grade. And so that 4th grader went through the whole routine before COVID. So even though COVID was very disruptive for a lot of our kids, and certainly our younger kids, he had already had some of that socialization going to school. Whereas the 1st grader, the first week was fun, and then after that, he was kind of through with school. There's too much, you know, the efforts for structure and being around. Like, he wanted a tablet and he wanted to be quiet and be near his mom. Is a woo. So I appreciate what Rodney's saying. I think that's a great anchor for this next part of the discussion. Whether it's the new normal or whatever we're going to call normal, we certainly don't want to go through what we just went through for our kids' sake. Like, yeah, I think a lot of us found out, if you're an adult and you already have some socialization skills and you already have some friends and colleagues and other stuff like that, yes, you could telework and you could be good. You know what I mean? Like, frankly, the time that I would have spent commuting, I ended up working. So the city got more out of me in some ways, you could argue, right? And a lot of us probably feel like that, right? But not true for our kids. Not at all true. And I read something, and I'm sure someone on the panel can correct me. Haven't they estimated that maybe a generation of learning loss has happened over the past 2 years? Like, the reading scores are already that far behind. So we have like a whole generation of work to do again based on what has happened in the past 2 years. So I see Dr. Salas Ramirez, your hand going up. You want to speak to that?
I think Clement has hands up first.
Sorry. Yeah, go for it.
I'm the other Ramirez. I didn't get my PhD yet.
That's all right.
I said yet, though. I said yet.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad you brought this up because I think the original question was, how do we feel coming back full time? And as an employee, again, DYCD doing that, it's one day a city employee, it's one day to 5 days. It was a lot. The commute, the stress, coming in, learning to socialize, meeting people for the first time, seeing old friends, and trying to build those relationships up again and having it being kind of a little awkward in the beginning and then figuring it out. It was really tough. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like the first month was like just a huge learning curve about living life again, like after COVID. And I'm glad you brought up, Rodney, you brought up like the safety protocol, the health protocols. That's great. But I think we also need to focus on the mental and emotional health protocols that are in place, because for me, it was tough. And we're having all these children come to school, again, either not knowing how to socialize around other people who aren't adults or their siblings, or who only had a very brief, stint of it, and then now COVID and now coming back. They're not prepared in the same way. They haven't learned those skills. They haven't identified those things in themselves that make them like resilient and everything else. So as we kind of move forward in figuring out what this new normal is, I think us as the adults in the room also have to look, identify the deficits, be patient, make sure we're teaching the skills that they need, make sure we're, putting a focus on socialization. How are we supposed to act around our friends? How are we supposed to deal with, adversity? How are we going to deal with disappointment? Because last year, if they got sad, they can stomp off to their room if they really wanted to. Now they're in a classroom, they can't do that. There's no, I'm just gonna leave. I'm done. I'm out of here. You can't. The teacher's gonna be like, whoa, where are you going, buddy? Come back. And we really need to be able to have the patience not to like get so frustrated with how, why can't they just kind of fall in line, and really identify and realize that it's not their fault. They literally don't have the skills yet to be successful. So how are we going to ensure that we give them these skills, that we model these skills, that we learn the skills for ourselves and be able to teach them what they need? So yeah, again, mental emotional health, I think it needs to play a big part moving forward for us, and especially for the youth that we have.
Dr. Ramirez, you're up, and then we'll take Ms. Ford next, okay?
Yeah, so I'm very much assets mindset. So I hate learning, people saying learning loss. These kids learned. They learned how to be resilient. They learned what a pandemic is. They learned how to be independent learners and thinkers. Even though remote was hard, there's some kids that were like, yo, I can take charge of the things that I'm doing in my work. And teachers adapted to that. And teachers were able to see that children could have autonomy in different spaces. So I very much also want to uplift that there were also some kids that were like, yo, this remote thing is dope, because now I can take the classes that I need to take when I need to take them. And I also have a flexible schedule where I could do internships, and some college applications were looking really robust during this time. So I want to uplift that we have things we need to work on. Absolutely. I like to talk about instructional loss. Yeah. They lost instruction. They didn't have that in-person experience with teachers, and we need to modify for that. I will highlight, though, that in that study with NAEP as an assessment, one, it was different than other years. So it's really hard to take an assessment that was done in previous years that isn't exactly the same every year and do comparisons year after year. So I want us to be really careful about how we use data. The other thing is that particular assessment in city districts, we didn't see significant changes among students. So in New York City, actually, we're going to look at some of the details of how it impacted our New York City public school students, but overall in large cities, students did not display any sort of deficits. So I want to make sure that we continue to do this work in an authentic way and really think about how to use the things that we learned during the pandemic, remote instruction, the differences of experiences between children that were in person and children that were remote, and how we can capitalize on that experience to enhance our students' learning experience. And so I'm a mom as well. My 11-year-old did spend a year doing remote. And when he went back, even though he had some disconnections, when he went back, he also felt safe. Like he knew he had the tools to navigate the pandemic. He knew mommy was here to hold him down. He has a little brother who he actually got to spend a lot of time with and like grow into that big brother space. And when he went back to school, he has an IEP. He was so confident and so solid that for middle school, I was like, yo, this kid can just handle his business. And that's exactly how it's been. He's in a new school, in a new environment with new peers, and he's so happy. He's like doing amazing. I also have a 3Ker that has not stepped out of my house, and this is his first large social experience. He's also doing great. But he does have classmates that are struggling. And so those are some of the conversations that I'm having with his teachers. Like, how do we support children that, you know, are okay with these kinds of transitions? And how do we support children that need a little bit more time to adapt? So keeping in mind developmental milestones, I think, are really important. Developmentally appropriate approaches, mental health, social emotional learning, culturally responsive practices, restorative justice in our schools are absolutely critical. And those are the things that I advocate for as a New York City board member. So the panel for educational policy, these are the things that we uplift in these spaces for these students. And so I'm excited that our Lise is going to talk, because I just had a briefing with the early childhood department. So I'm excited to hear what she has to say.
Thank you. I was like, yay, she talked about the 3Kers. We didn't have, I always say early childhood didn't have the luxury of returning, because we were essential workers. We were an essential part of the essential cloth. And so our pause was very, very short. We had to build the plane and fly it at the same time. And we're still growing. And I use the word growing through that process, because what adults can adapt to and what we have adapted to and are resilient to, it takes a lot for us to get our kids into these spaces, our small kids. I'm in birth to 5. So all along, we've been teaching them to share, and give and hug and do all of these things that are socially interactive. And then we abruptly said no. And so we had to unlearn what we spent so much time learning. And then coming into 2021, where we were, more actively back in the buildings, those who had already been there were sort of used to the mask wearing and the shoe covers and the things like that. And those who weren't, it was work to get them, to get used to these things, to get adapted to what did not feel very normal to our little people, right? And then I recall a story, and I just didn't know how to answer her. It was a mom of a child. He was 3 years old, moving into 4-year-old classroom, and had identified speech delays, but mask wearing. And so the speech therapist is trying to work with him and model how to say certain things and use her mouth to do so. And he was mortified. He could not take his mask off, because all the work we had done leading up to that was keep your mask on. And even though she was wearing the clear shield and she was doing all of that work with him, when it was time now for him to take his mask off, he just couldn't do it, because all the work that we had done was around keep your mask on, keep your mask up. And so I agree with you, Dr. Ramirez. Our children are resilient. They're trying their very best. Our staff are resilient, but we are really building the plane and flying as we go. And it's been an interesting journey, but we didn't have, when we say come back, I often chuckle, because in early childcare, I think we paused for April, and by we had to figure it out and get back to the swing of things in the midst of all that was going on. So I don't know that we ever left. To be honest, in ECE, I don't know that we ever left. We shifted and we pivoted, but we never really left.
Your point is well taken, and our audience and our families never left either, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, we've all had to figure this out, and probably every household is sort of flying the plane while building as well. Yeah. It's interesting, I'm sitting with how, on the one hand, this, on the other hand, that, and there's a third and there's a fourth, so I guess we're right to have this conversation. There's not just one linear path. There's a lot of insights that we can draw on things that we've done and things that we've done successfully. And there is a moment, I'll go back to why I wanted to do just 1 second for attaboy and attagirl. I think we're often in conversations here in the barbershop where something will emerge and maybe there's an opportunity for folks to step in. We've talked a lot, particularly last year when we were talking about transformation and stuff like that, about what can you do and kind of cast your bucket where you are. So I do think it's noteworthy to spend a moment to acknowledge a lot of sensible taking care of ourselves and our kids that has already happened on a lot of fronts, and take a breath and figure out what do we need to do next. Now I saw other hands went up though, and I want to hog the conversation. I think Yvette, you wanted to weigh in.
Well, Tessa was first.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
Tessa first, then
Tessa and then Yvette.
Thank
My
you.
bad.
I just wanted to pick up on where we were headed in that conversation by saying what some of the things that this whole pandemic has taught us. And that is simply what we thought were essential workers, that expanded for us, right? And this is where I have to give my shout out to every educator, right? Who not only were they parenting their own children, they then had to parent children online, especially those younger children. So I just have to say, I salute every single educator. And I'm saying this as the daughter of a teacher, right? The work that they did was phenomenal. It was outstanding. I have to tell you how much I began to appreciate my delivery people, okay? For when I couldn't get out, I appreciated that. The fact that I was able to have my groceries delivered when I couldn't get to the supermarket. So I can say one of the lessons I learned was a lot of gratitude. And many moons ago, when I was younger, I worked for tips. Can I tell you how important it became for me to double my tips? Because I wanted to show my appreciation for the people who were now being recognized as essential workers. Right? So we have to remember the people who work in the groceries, in the pharmacy, the people who deliver our food, our fast food, our groceries, our educators, as essential workers as well. I couldn't let that go. But I also wanted to talk about, because we got on this briefly, and it was something that I regularly go to as I talk to parents, and I hear sometimes the stress levels. And I am grateful that some of those stress levels have begun to decline, but they're still there. Right? Because what we're calling the new normal is really learning how to cope with the unknown that changes every time, right? Every day. It seems like no sooner than we get it figured, it's something new, right? It's a new adjustment. And I've had to learn to be more fluid and not so rigid. And for me, at this stage in the game, over 50, I have to try not to be rigid. And I have to remember that things are fluid and have grace for the change. So one of the things that I regularly talk about is self-care, that if I am not taking care of myself, and if I'm not taking care of the relationships and the people that matter to me, I can have nothing to give to anyone else. And I regularly tell parents, when I talk about self-care, I'm not talking about a bubble bath. I'm not talking about paint and sip with your friends. I'm talking about having meaningful conversations. If you can't find a therapist, right? Find a group. Find people that you can talk about the grief, because we've lost so much, right? Not only family members, but a way of life that was normal. So there's a lot of loss. We've transitioned in jobs, right? We've transitioned, things have changed in life, and we have to find safe spaces to have these brave and courageous and transparent conversations. And that is why I love and admire what you do here on Barbershop Talks. Thanks.
Roberto?
Yeah, I
Scott.
just want.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all right. Thank you. I just really wanted to, first of all, I'm so glad that Tessa took the conversation back to highlighting educators, because I really wanted to make sure that we highlighted the CBOs who really did a great job at managing during the pandemic and making sure that all of the services were provided. Specifically, I'm in the campus unit, and our campus programs really did a fantastic job and it's really a Herculean effort at making sure that our after school programs were delivered during the pandemic in a virtual setting. And so I think that we need to make sure that, especially they're all back in person at this time, right? But making sure that they're taking those same the services and those same strategies that they're implementing them in person, right? There was so much grace and patience that was given during that time. And I think if we can have providers can take those strategies that they've learned during the pandemic that we know that works, right? And we can take that in person, I think we've got a recipe for success.
Mike, can I
Well,
jump in?
well, hold on, because Yvette was trying to, she had a hand up in the chat. So Yvette, I want to get her in.
Yeah,
We haven't heard from Yvette yet.
no, yeah, definitely. I was childhood and children being labeled as having attention deficit disorder because they were not able to have relationships with children outside of the house. My grandson's 4 years old, and he was in the house for 2 years before he got a chance to go to preschool. And now with him going to preschool, his bandwidth for being outside and around other children is very limited. And that way, you're saying that teachers need to have patience. They need to recognize that there was children that are like 2 to 4 that are going to have a very, very hard time trying to get acclimated to the school, to the teachers. And like you said, there was a gentleman that said, he's ready to get his bag and be out of there. He throws temper tantrums because he's not used to being in that school environment. So where is the threshold for accepting that, working with children with that, before you put a stigma on them that they have, that they're a problem child? And that's my biggest concern right now, because the doctor was correct in saying that the sixth graders and the fifth graders, they thrived on it because they moved at their own pace. Their teachers gave them an assignment, they completed it, they knew exactly what they were doing. But it's those preschoolers who was in the house for 2 years that did not know that this whole world existed outside the door. Okay, so that was my concern. That's what I wanted to get in. Like, how are we addressing that? How are we looking at that before these children are labeled?
Rod?
So I echo everything that everyone said thus far. And as it relates to some of the things that we've learned, right? I want to give the dads a big up. Mike and Scott, we've been doing this work with men for a number of years now. And I got to tell you, from my observation, and I hang around the schools, right, as a community organizer, a resource person, and I've had a chance to just watch clusters of schools where the whole environment and the dynamic has changed. There was a time when you could only see or could expect to see mothers taking their kids to school.
Right.
And we do that as a regular annual thing through Dads Take Your Child to School. But Mike, what I'm seeing is such a cultural revolutionary change from the top to the bottom. We've got men involved in the school-based governance, their PTA presidents, their district leaders, right? And we don't have to do special events to go to a particular school and try to figure out what just happened here. You see all of these guys bringing their kids to school, just because it's a good practice. And so, when we look at what we went through in the pandemic, we discovered some things about men and their capability as well to be functional parents, because we all had to play a role. Even, fathers and uncles and grandfathers, I even had a role. My job for my grandkids was, you read to that girl that's in that first grade. Do that on a regular. And even though my granddaughter, couldn't take me for so long, we had to deal with that. We had to go through that. We could not afford for her to come out of the pandemic and be behind, because if you can't read, there's a lot of other things that you're not going to be able to do in school, right? And so I do think that men stepped up to the plate and we revolutionized parenting to a great extent, because when I was a little boy, it was just the opposite. Dads, you weren't involved that way from a whole lot of points of view. If he had to come up to the school, it was a whole different dynamic. And so, I mean, everybody is saying something good, but I just wanted to just because we're deeply wedded to the Fathers Program, be able to say that the work that DYCD is doing in promoting fatherhood programs, that work has not gone in vain. The impact can be seen on the street.
That's very powerful to receive. And I think we could spend a little bit of time there for our dads, for our moms who have helped advance and shift kind of what's normal now. So dad engagement, mother engagement, being on site, being involved, sharing power, sharing engagement, and working with institutions. How do we continue to champion that? How do we continue to set the good examples that's already happening, encourage other folks to figure out where they fit in, given that so many of our parents in the city, so many dads, so many moms have been doing what you're
I know
talking
you're
about?
not talking to me. I know you're not
I'm
talking to
opening
me.
it up to the group. I know you can jump in and you will inspire other folks to weigh in as well.
I'm gonna yield because that's right where I'm at, Mike. I mean, I'm hearing, I think Dr. Ramirez sounds as though she sits close with the DOE, right? She sounds very, very much involved with social emotional learning. So I know this could connect with her, right? And so, yes, dad's clubs, right? How do one of the things that David Banks has been saying to us, right, is find those things that work, figure out how to absorb the best practices, sustain and scale, right? So we could figure out those those platforms that give us the opportunity to do that. Everybody's not going to be on board, but you could take a citywide approach in some of those districts that have the good sense to say, embrace this body of work, go to those schools who can show those best practices, stand them up, evaluate them for outcomes, and then let's see where we go from year to year, because we've been doing this work for a while. But I think it's imperative that we figure out how to institutionalize in a way in which it makes sense of something more than just a good time feel. And I'm going to stop there.
Clement, you want to jump in, Clement?
Yeah, and actually this relates to what I was originally going to say. I was going to originally jump off of Tessa's comment, where she was talking about self-care and sharing and the importance of actually having those conversations. And I have to say, like, as a very involved father, former PTA co-president, I take my kids to school all the time, or like the whole shebang. I've also been working with kids for years. I've been working with kids since I was in 7th grade, and it just became a passion, and I've been doing it ever since. And for me, sitting down, doing stuff is still difficult. So for me, who has all these tools, all this experience, who's very involved, I'm still finding it very difficult. I can just imagine how people who are not as equipped, right? Fathers who maybe don't have that wealth of experience are dealing with these issues. And I think, going back to like Barbershop and the whole point of it, like trying to reach out to like the male community, is getting past that, like stiff upper lip mentality, suppressing the feelings, not talking about it, just trying to do what you need to do. And really finding out that self-care is okay. Having the conversation is okay. Letting people know about your struggles is okay, because everybody's struggling. Nobody has it perfect. I'm sorry, if I can't do it perfect, not many people can do it perfect. Because again, I've been doing this for years and years and years. And I still look at my son sometimes and I'm like, yo, I don't know what's going through your head right now. Right? So please, 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 anybody on this call, if you're listening, whatever it is, go have a conversation, talk to somebody, reach out to some fellow fathers. I guarantee you they're facing the same struggles. Get some help, figure it out together. Don't be an island, don't feel alone. So Tessa, thank you for that, because it's something that gets overlooked, unfortunately, very often. We just had to talk to each other and be honest and be vulnerable and just be willing to live in that space.
Perfect timing. Tessa, you up next.
Thank you. I wanted to share that the reason why I'm very passionate about this, and this is one of the ways in which I did get to connect with Scott, was that he was a presenter for me when I did our UFT Men in Education. And I had the privilege of working with a group of fathers who were PTA presidents on the CECs. One of them, Scott, one of our mutual friends, Mr. Andre Peterson, who brought us together, was the PTA president for his daughters. So I regularly share with those gentlemen, the first person who walked me to school was my dad. And my dad was the PTA president. And I remember as a little girl being jealous because I didn't want to share my dad with all the other kids because he went on class trips. And because my father was a factory worker, he worked right in Brooklyn at Domino Sugar, and my mom was a teacher, because of his shift, he was able to escort me to school. And so my earliest memories was trying to keep up holding that big hand while he rushed me off to school. And so I tell fathers all the time, you don't have to do something extraordinary. You just simply have to be present. It's extraordinary is doing the ordinary thing extra, right? And just continuing to be consistent. And because my dad was that man for me, I regularly encourage fathers, and I talk to them and I say, I was a daughter, I can tell you, right? Those conversations that my father had with me along the way made me who I am. So dads, you don't have to do the big thing. You just have to be there.
And Tess, it's so unique. I'm so happy you said that, because we really talk to men about being present. And I think we don't really understand how important it means just to be there, be present. And I do a workshop with some guys at the time, and I always ask them, if you close your eyes and tell me a place you can go back to like instantly. And I asked them, was it involving an object or a person? And most time it's a person. The object that we had, that bike that we couldn't wait to get, those sneakers that we couldn't live without, that little toy that for Christmas I had to have, that iPod when it first came out. All that's gone. But we can instantly go back to being present with someone and interacting with them. And your presence really doesn't cost anything. And how important it is about being present. Doc, I'm turning back over to you. Doc, go ahead.
Thank you for that. And that's beautiful. And I support all of that. I also want to add that some of us are single moms and fathers are not in our children's lives. So sometimes it's a little tricky for us when schools are like, dad bringing you to school, or, daddy, whatever day. Some of our boys are like, and I have two sons, are like, damn, that's not me.
So Doc, let me just clarify. Yeah. The campaign, Dad Take a Child to School, it specifically says fathers are father figures.
Yeah.
So we're really looking for men in the community to step up. So even though it's called, Dad Take a Child to School, I think that was just and Rodney is part of the clever way of thinking. But the premise behind it is that men in the community need to show up. We want fathers and father figures. Whoever you identify, and I have like one of my friends, he's a pastor of this church, and he says, this is like one of the worst days in his during the year, because all the kids in his congregation want him to show up at their school. So now he's up in White Plains, and he has to go like 10 different schools within 2 hours, trying to show up and be present, because they see him just as the male figure. So I want to make sure that we understand, and we don't want to exclude mom. We love that mom show up and everything. It's just that we want men in the community. And sometimes, and Tess, I guess you can contest to this also, sometimes you're just the community father. You're the father for every child on that block. And what it means for it being a male present on that block for everyone. And I think we as men, we have to start learning and understand, I got to show up for everybody. Yes, I show up for mine, but I have to show up for everybody also too. That young boy, that young girl who doesn't have that male figure. I need to be open to ear. I know one of my up in Westchester, they have a thing called the Grandpa Program, where that they have retired men who are looking for something to do. Guess what? They go to the school and have lunch with these children every day. They go to a different school and sit in the cafeteria and have lunch and conversation. And it's like the world to some of these kids that these older men are coming to have lunch with them. They don't know these men, but they love it.
Yeah, I
There
was
was something, yeah, there was something that Dr. Ramirez was about to say though, Scott.
yeah.
That we as men in the men's movement, we need to hear her say this to us,
Yes.
right? Because I got a feeling where she's going with it because I've encountered it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I don't want to invalidate that. I just wanted to say that I've navigated that experience for my son by making sure that the school has Black men as teachers and as paras that can serve as mentors and support. And my son turned 11 last Monday, and the first person that called him was one of his Black male teachers from his school. And so finding those mentors and finding those people, it can be tricky as a mom to reconcile that you can't fill that gap for your children. But it's important for us to recognize the importance of that presence and mentorship programs and programs like this. I also wanted to elevate, I do a lot of, my field is developmental neuroscience, and I do a lot of gender differences studies on behavior. And I think a lot of people, there's a lot of bias and stigma on different mental health conditions that we are now thinking of them again in an assets mindset. So in speaking about boys that are stigmatized or categorized with ADHD or ADD, it's just a different way of learning. So how do we engage the child rather than thinking about them as having some sort of learning disorder? It's just a different learning opportunity, right? I think that we as a community have to really embrace the fact that our children, there are some children that need support. And so we really need to break down these barriers of stigma. Like, I don't want my child categorized. Yes, I get that. But at the same time, there's some kids that with that support thrive. And their needs change throughout development. So while getting these supports and these interventions early on, we can make sure that later on as teenagers, they have the tools and the mechanisms to engage in their learning environment in a much more independent way and in a much more fulfilling way for them. For me, in thinking about these things, I think about intrinsic motivators, right? So this whole reward system that we have with grades and stars and charts in our schools, we have to question why we're doing that. We have to question the standards. A lot of folks in the chat on YouTube are like, oh, everybody's behind. Well, you know what? Then we need to sit down and think about what the developmental standards should be now that are developmentally appropriate due to the experiences that our children have had in the last couple of years. It's not trying to figure out how we catch up to before, because before, no child had to experience 2.5 years of a pandemic that we're still in. So now we have to sit down and really think about what are the resources that our children need, what is developmentally appropriate, but also what is specific to that child's biology. Most boys can't sit down for circle time for more than 15 minutes. That's not abnormal.
I remember seeing a study saying that boys will learn more by moving around than sitting still. And we still force them to sit down in class.
Like, come on, let them walk around a little bit. They can do it quietly. Doesn't disrupt anybody. We have to normalize those behaviors, again, that are developmentally appropriate. And then we have to start adultifying our Black children and giving them that space to grow and to exist in a world that embraces them and loves them unapologetically. And so that's what I was trying to say.
Ooh. You said a lot right there.
I don't even know if you want to come behind that, Ms.
White. That
White.
exactly. I'm timidly reacting because you dropped a lot of bombs, a lot of jewels in there. Oh wow, where? Oof. So
Lisa, you want to go behind that?
I'll hazard to say this quickly, right? One of the things that I've been hopeful about is the opportunity to make the best out of a bad situation. So the pandemic has been so disruptive to all of us that through the barbershop and through other conversations, we've been able to say everyone can reassess mental well-being and seek resources, because it's safe to say, I'm not okay, you're not okay, she, he, they are not okay, because something has happened, right? So if we can reestablish the bar there, which is already an if, but if we can reestablish the bar there, like, let's normalize that we're all going to support one another seeking mental wellness. I think you just hit another home run. Like, let's use this disruptive period to reassess what are our aims and objectives for our education. So as we move to what's normal right now, like, let's look at the data, let's look at anecdotal experiences, and look at how kids have learned, how schools have adapted. I think it was you, Ms. Butler, like how schools have adapted to doing both telelearning and in-person learning, and how do we stitch together things that actually are going to make more sense that what we had in place, rather than try to force everything back to how it was in early 2000s. So why do that? If we've actually learned some things that have been of use, why do that? Yeah.
So it's almost like changing the narrative a little bit, right? You know, how we talk about things. And so it's always wonderful to have partners, whether they be at DYCD or DOE, because everybody's bringing a different kind of perspective through a different lens. So when Dr. Ramirez says, don't call kids at risk, right? Because then you're speaking a negative narrative into them. She is saying, don't talk about learning loss, right? You know, I've had the educators say that to me before, right? Don't say that. You might want to say unfinished learning, but you don't say learning loss, because it positions the conversation differently so that people can feel good about themselves in a direction that we have to go into work.
So that people can feel good about themselves, but also so that we can put our attention on where we need to put our attention. And institutional thinking often will scapegoat and make victims of people instead of celebrating. And as Dr. Salas Ramirez and others were talking about, having an assets mindset. You know, I was laughing as you were speaking, because I remember there's a program that we used to operate, which initially we had called a Disconnected Youth Program. And at one point we sat internally and said, who is going to sign up to be part of the Disconnected Youth Program? Let us stop talking about that, right? And so then we renamed it and labeled it Opportunity Youth, because we wanted to afford opportunity to young people, right? You know, so it's not we had changed the program, is that we changed how we were talking about what the program is. You know, I don't want to, you know, one of the quick anecdote, I used to do family counseling at Queensborough, and ironically at that time, I don't know about now, but ironically, when you come in, there's a whole training for staff that the prison would put on, which is largely about not being hustled or conned, and it was a lot about communication. And I thought it was ironic, because everything that they taught me in the first few days was part of stuff that I turned around and brought into the family counseling, just by flipping it though. It wasn't about worrying about being conned. It was about, how do you have transparent communication with your loved one in the last weeks before you're released to prison? You know, so it was the same orientation though. You know, like, don't let these guys, no, actually let's empower people with the tools to do active listening and communication skills with one another.
So you want to jump in there real quick? Because I know you've been waiting.
No, it's fine, because this conversation is really, I'm listening to it, and it's talking about disrupting, right? And I keep thinking disrupting systems, right? And so even the way that we're thinking about this, right? So COVID was challenging for all of us, but when will we be talking about mental health in such a way, right? When will we be talking about social justice issues in the way that we've been talking about them? I want to kind of hold on to it, because I feel so passionate about it. And this idea of people really redefining who they are and what is important, and the importance of collectiveness, right? This idea of being a collective. Like, I keep thinking, I just finished reading this book, How We Show Up, that talks about being a collective group, and what it looks like. People talking about creating pods and what those pods look like, right? And if you tried to create a pod but realize you didn't have a pod, now you realize you need one. So like all of those things, I'm serious. This is what I talk about. So I'm putting on a different hat, right? Because for DYCD, I do a lot of talent development and DEI stuff around talent development, but I'm a therapist, right? So in my therapist head, all I keep hearing is my patients coming in talking about, I ain't had no pod. Right. And so now we are recognizing the need for pods. Right. And so even as you talk about the fathers and and even if you don't have a father figure in this space, the other men coming in, right? Other women supporting each other, because I think we need to talk about that, right? Women of color supporting each other. I know we're talking about barbershop stuff, and it's the man stuff, but men need to be even thinking about this because women supporting each other in these processes, creating a collective, talking to your neighbors. Like people began to do things that they never did before. We have been living in silos, and now we realize we need to be together, that we need to rely on each other. And I think that we need to hold on to that. There has to be a way that we need to continue to facilitate that, because it is imperative for our mental health, because we know there are not enough therapists. We know that there's not enough therapists, and not everybody needs to go to a therapist. Maybe, like you said, it needs to be a group. Maybe it needs to be this. So like this idea of collectiveness to me is key, and creating a collective supportive system.
So Ms. White, I want to move it up, and Clement, I know you're waiting there, but I want to move it up a notch, because we talked about our children, we talked about our kids. Let's talk about the workforce. Let's talk about us getting back into the office. And, there's a whole new big thing that, and Mike, I hope you can get the right word. It's like people like they're volunteering quitting.
The buzz term I've heard of late is quiet quitting.
Quiet quitting. Yeah.
So let's talk about it.
And it's funny because I was out at my sites.
Quiet quitting, yo?
A couple of my sites I went today and said, Scott, we're understaffed. I'll just let you know we're understaffed. We can't find people. And I was saying, listen, what I don't want you to do is start hiring warm bodies. Please don't do that. I said, I'd rather you be less staffed than just hire a warm body. And they said, oh, but Scott, we know we need these people. But what's happening where people are, as Mike's saying, quiet quitting? I was talking to one of the assistant directors at one of the spots where they were saying, hey, they hire people in 6 months and they just don't show up anymore. How do you not show up for work anymore after 6 months?
Yvette, you want to talk about it? Jump in.
You're muted.
Unmute, please.
Unmute. Yvette, unmute.
From an HR perspective, so happening is through this pandemic, a lot of people who worked from home realized that they can get a lot of things accomplished. They're taking commutation into consideration for when they're traveling into the office. Going into the office, you're socializing with so many people, you're not really focusing and concentrating on the work that's done at hand. Not only that, there's a lot of people who left jobs. They have now moved out of the city, and the city right now is coming back, but it's not really back. There's a lot of people that are still working from home. And with them working from home, all the businesses are failing. You see a lot of vacant storefronts and things. The guy where you used to go get your sandwich and, maybe you men got your shoe shine. You don't see these guys anymore because they have all disappeared. But as far as what you're saying, quiet quitting, once you get back into that workforce and you're around all your coworkers who you've always known, you have that coworker that's really not pulling their weight, but you were really shining on your own with all the work that you were doing and getting your stuff in on time. But now you got these coworkers who are all just socializing, they're talking, and you're not getting anything accomplished. And with all of this quiet quitting, you got to be careful because these employers are paying rent for these brick and mortars for you to come to. And if they see that on a scale, there's not enough people there, they are not going to want to stay there, or they're not going to have a space that's that big. I hope that answers some of what you were thinking.
Clement, you want to jump in there? I see you've been waiting, your hand's been up for a while.
Yeah, no, it was actually leading off of what Lisa said and going into this next topic, actually, which is, I do think it's important to acknowledge what we learned from COVID. And I think a lot of what we see when we're talking about quiet quitting and us in the workforce is we saw a different way to do things. We saw maybe a better way to do things. We grew in certain ways in our positions as we, pivoted. But too often when we return to work, they wanted it business as usual. So a lot of that quiet quitting is really due to the frustration of knowing what change can make a difference and not being able to act on it. So like the one thing I would say is, we talked about like changing the narrative, talking to strength. We have to advocate for these changes. And, it doesn't have to be like anything crazy, but again, going back to communication, we're all in this together. Have the conversations, talk. Don't be afraid to bring it up to leadership. Don't be afraid to bring it up to your teams. Don't be afraid to bring it up to, whoever is going to listen to you. Because we did see during the pandemic that there were options out there that made things better for us. Mental health, physical health, everything. And I'm not saying we're going to go back to working fully remote all the time, but I think maybe it's time to take some of those best practices and actually utilize them. Would some hybrid models work? Would some maybe, doing things different work? And we saw that they did. So let's actively act on them. Let's advocate for it, because if not, you're going to have more of the same. People are going to come into work frustrated. Why am I here? I could have did this from home. This is ridiculous. And then they're just not going to put in the effort. But if they see that people are actively trying to work on making the work-life experience better, then it becomes like, all right, I'm part of this. I'm going to contribute. I can see that there's movement. I can see that there's change, and foster that buy-in for a lot of like employees. So yeah, I mean, we're going to keep seeing it until the work evolves, and hopefully people can kind of get on board in positions to make that happen, to really, push the needle forward, because, it's a shame, but we're losing a lot of good people sometimes, because they're finding the jobs who are more, innovative, the jobs who are willing to pivot with them, instead of just trying to force them back into the same hole they were.
So I'm gonna go with Arlise, and then Ms. Butler. I'm coming to you because you've been quiet. So Ms. Butler, you
We need
get
some
yourself ready
gems from
to
CUNY.
jump in here. So Arlise, you go first, and then I'm going to Ms. Butler.
Sure, I'm happy we are here, right? Because unofficially, we have the conversation in ECE that the pandemic created an epidemic, and that is the nationwide loss of teachers, family workers, support workers in our ECE communities. And so I don't know if it was the vaccine mandate. I don't know if it was all the nerves of coming back to in person. But in ECE, we have a huge, huge challenge with having staffed our programs. I appreciate you, Scott, saying not just warm bodies. And so as a result of not having warm bodies, because we have, our babies, that we just can't have anyone come into their space. So we have to be extremely selective of the staff who work in ECE. And as a result of this, enrollment is at an all-time low nationwide, not just New York City. We've not been able to open up all of our classrooms back to scale or capacity because we don't have the staff to support the ratios that are required to do this. And so quiet quitting or loud quitting or quiet firing or loud firing, it's a huge challenge for us in ECE. And we've been trying to figure out how to be innovative and creative. But I think, all of you have spoken earlier about not some of our children, depending on the age, were more resilient in the remote learning context, but it's not developmentally appropriate for our younger babies. And so we don't have the luxury of being in remote. It doesn't work for them in the same way that it may work for some older children, especially when some of them have other developmental supports that are needed, right? That doesn't work in a remote context. I'm a mom, or I like to call us super moms when we're moms of children with disabilities. And I can tell you that therapy in a remote context was, excuse my transparency, is a farce. Like it entertained him, but thank goodness for the resources that I have access to, but that wasn't everybody's testimony. And so he thrived, but that was because of all that was afforded to him on the home front. And I applaud the therapists and the teachers who really did their due diligence to try to do this in a remote context, but it wasn't always successful. And so when we think about how the pandemic is continuing to, for lack of a better term, plague us, we're having a huge issue and a huge conversation in ECE as it relates to having fully staffed programs and supporting our children and families.
Ms. Butler, you want to jump in there? Because be quiet. I see you over there, signifying and signing off on some things, but I ain't heard from you.
So let me just say that, the conversation is quite interesting. But with the university, they have in fact approved both religious and health exemptions for employees as well as students. And each of our campuses, as well as the central office where I work out of, has in fact provided wellness programs for staff as well as for students. We are encouraging students, however, to come back on campus so that they can in fact engage in, that person-to-person engagement, that camaraderie with their colleagues as well as the professors. Last semester, I did a course and the instructor was elated, to literally have students in front of him as opposed to virtual. We did in fact have one virtual session because he was out of town, but it did in fact give him an opportunity, as well as the other students, an opportunity to actually engage and see each other, even though we had masks on, to articulate, our concerns, in our expressions and our thoughts. I kind of think that the question that was posed was, what can young adults, returning to CUNY, get support from, let's say, their community, as well as the college community at large. Once they have in fact been accepted to a college, that is in fact their educational community. And doors are in fact open to provide those students with any type of academic support and also mental support, health support that they need to ensure, that they are all right, with continuing with their education.
I was, when you're talking, because I'm thinking about my son. He's upstate in Utica, but he's taking classes down at Baruch, right? Mm-hmm. And he's taking all his classes remote. Mm-hmm. But once again, and I just wanted him to have the college campus experience. And those of you who were able to go on a college campus and the experience of walking across the quad and being in class and really seeing and interacting with your colleagues, and then making some lifelong friendships because of what you've met on campus or the college university or that connection you had. But I'm a little nervous that, are we moving really, because it seems like we're moving into the metaverse quick and fast, or the metaverse is preparing us right now to be part of this metaverse. Am I saying it right? Metaverse?
You're saying it right.
I'm saying it right. But in our young people, they're kind of like there. And maybe that's why people are doing this quiet quitting, because they're just as functional in the metaverse with quiet quitting and being very successful over there, where maybe as old timers, we're still stuck in this socialization world that we need to see you and feel you to get the job done, where they're over there buying property and buying metaverse and Bitcoin and all this other stuff that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. But maybe I'm just too old school. I just had a birthday on Sunday, so I'm not there yet.
Now, I kind of think it's very important for students to actually engage in conversation and socialization on the campus. We are, however, providing some individuals who are still a little apprehensive to do online. And so basically we're doing a hybrid. We will not go back to just one platform. We will in the future, engage in both. Because that is, in fact, what the request is, from prospective applicants, be they youth or either adults returning to college. So we do, in fact, have to open that opportunity up for them to continue with their education in the platform in which they feel comfortable with.
So I see Dr. Ramirez and then Tessa. I see Dr. Ramirez, you ready to go. I think you go ahead and drop some jewels on me.
So I'm also in CUNY, and most of my students are medical students and graduate students. I would say that in terms of the research, like research labs, at least at City College, we're still at 70% capacity. So if a student isn't required to do research, but you have somebody that has a lab that's funded, those are the opportunities that they have. For us in the medical school, because we have students going into the clinic from their second year in the program, they actually appreciated being at home and doing their lectures at home so that they could prepare to go to the hospital, which in general was like really extenuating for them because they're young medical students. People are always confusing them with, medical assistants and it was a lot of labor to be that young, to be 18, 19, 20 years old and being in a hospital and supporting all of the patients that were coming in. So it's also really dependent on the context and what you're training for, what you're looking to do in the future. One of my former medical students was actually featured in the New York Times as one of the first physicians that got COVID, and he was on a respirator. And so those were a lot of the we graduated a class 3 months early so that they could go into the workforce. Like, these are the conversations that we have in professional settings with our future physicians or future practitioners so that they can prepare for the world. And actually having the remote option was actually a reprieve for them. It was almost like, all right, I can kind of manage this in my own way so that I can go into the workforce and be prepared for the trauma that I'm going to see and have the skills that I need.
But Doc, is the new world the metaverse? Is that the new word? Because we're doing things.
I think we are going to have to reconcile with that. I will say one thing about the metaverse. I connected with I'm also a community organizer. I was connecting with folks all over the world. Like around COVID, I was part of the World Health Network. I was talking to people in England that were really going through it. And we were really talking about how do we navigate this pandemic and through a global perspective. And those opportunities we don't get when we're, in NAC 102. Like we got those global connections. We were able to mobilize hundreds of parents in this space, and Tessa knows, by just having these like virtual meetings. Even in our local school boards, we had school boards that had 5 people go every month. Now we get 250 parents to log in and able to have young people come and give testimony. We hardly ever created spaces for young people to be in those meetings with us. And now we have the capacity to do that. 6th graders, I've had 6th graders and 7th graders come tell me, yo, the school lunch sucks. This whole vegan thing got to go. Like, we have those conversations because they can be at home. Mom and dad aren't running around. And they can log on and talk to us and tell us what we have to advocate for in that space. So I can't knock it. I really can't. It's not optimal. Sometimes I'm like, oh, they really need to hold something in their hands. But we got to figure out how to navigate that to create for the right space for people. And I will add, with the quiet quitting, I think folks are just fed up. Like, literally 2 years in this pandemic, Black and brown folks were left behind. Our life expectancy has shortened. We didn't have access to healthcare. Our communities were the last ones to get access to the vaccines. Come on now. I'm not going to go up there. Sorry, let me not go crazy, but I'm not going to, climb up the ivory tower for you to tell me that I don't have a voice. And so I think some folks are like, you know what? I've learned that I have to take care of myself and my community, and whoever's up there ain't going to do it for me. So you know what? I'm going to handle my business on the street.
I think some of that is, sorry, go Tessa.
I'm sorry. I just had to pick up on this because this whole conversation about quiet quitting, I had shared the Wall Street Journal article on quiet quitting with quite a few people because it's also a generational thing. So we know that younger people, I'm an older Gen Xer, right? So younger people, they have a different perspective about being loyal, right, to a job in a very different way. For them, it's very fluid. And since I have a millennial, I can tell you she changed jobs during the pandemic. Why? Because she understood she was able to make more money with less demands, right, with something that better fit her because she was trying to gear herself to get ready for grad school, right? So for her, that change made sense. And the reason why I talk about, passion is your fuel. If you have a job that you do not have a connection and you are not passionate to, why stay, right? And during this time, jobs, quite a few of them, were asking people because of staffing issues to pick up extra work, extra hours, do additional, and people had to begin to say, you know what, my relationships mean more, my health means more to me, my family means more to me than this job. And so as a result, I'm quietly quitting, which simply says, I'm going to be present. You're not going to get 110%. You're not maybe even going to get 90. I'm going to do just enough so I can keep this job and pay my bills. That's what quiet quitting is, right? And we are seeing that in of itself has become pandemic, right? So
Lisa?
let's be very clear about what quiet quitting is.
And I also think, and while we do think it's the younger, I think it's everybody in some ways, right? I think everybody is reflective about what's important. And I think people are doing businesses and creating businesses and I think in that quiet quitting, I would question, right? Although I don't know if I'm quite for quiet quitting. I think that if you are disenchanted with the workplace, then you need to find a place that you can fit in. I think we spend too much time at work to quietly quit. That's like that. To me, it just does not make sense, right? We spend far too much of our lives. It's not even work. We spend far too much of our lives, right? To waste our time in quietly quitting. I'm hoping that people are using that time to do those LLCs like Tessa just said, right? And so I will tell you as someone who has just quit, right? It's like the danger, I just quit, right? I just quit. So that's my I've built and focusing on building my business, right? So that I can have some flexibility. I have redefined what my life will look like because I want that flexibility and still want to engage and work with my community and be involved in it, but in a very different way. And so I do think we need to think about that, right? And I also think there's a part of us, right? As I think about the work that I do with DYCD, I'm always talking about how are we engaging as managers and our staff? How are we engaging? Are we building? Are we creating spaces for staff to move to the next level? Are we creating safe and brave spaces, right? And so I will say that, and that's always part of my conversation, right? And so I think these are important pieces. How do we create spaces that people, because when I was a manager, when I was a director, because I've done my bit, right, as I call it, I've done my time. And as a manager, the first thing I thought about was, and what gave me pleasure was how I was building the person under me for the next position. I wanted you to take my job, and I came in saying that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what people want. We need to be creating spaces so that people can come in and take my job. I want you to take my job. And I have had the pleasure of being at spaces where I've seen people who have come from the community, who I were line workers, but now they are directors. And they are directors actually in DYCD. So like and those are the things that I'm talking about. So I don't think we're building. I think this is also a mindset that we have to change how we are treating staff, how we are looking at them in the workplace, how we are building them. All of that matters. Employee engagement matters. It matters. Their voices matter. Being part of the conversation matters. And that's what I think is important. And I can tell you that even as somebody who I ran an early Head Start, making people part of the conversation mattered. That's how they built, and they allowed me, and they gave me ideas on what to do. So those are the things we need to be shifting. It's a shift in mindset, right? No more, I'm telling you what to do. What can you do to participate? How can we think about ideas of building?
That's so very important, because in some places it's pretty much like a dictatorship. And then, it's like I'm stepping back. Whereas if you're part of the conversation, if you're part of the decision making, it shows that you are in fact important, and then you are in fact making those important decisions to move forward.
Elise, you want to jump in there?
I do. I love that you said that, Lisa. Thank you. The model in Head Start is what we call shared governance. And there is no movement. There are no policy changes. There's no money spent. There's no hiring. There's no termination of staff without the approval of the Parent Policy Council. They are not just parents. They are stakeholders in this work. They are stakeholders in our implementation. They are stakeholders in the decision-making process as it relates to Head Start. And so even before we can go to what's called the governing board, we have to get the sign off of our Parent Policy Council to move forward and make these decisions. And so, I mean, obviously I will sing the accolades of Head Start for all the days of my life, but that's the biggest and the best part of Head Start that I absolutely love, because our parents feel empowered. They know that they have worth. They know that their voice not just counts, because we always say your voice counts, your voice counts. No, their voice matters. If they don't say yes, we can't move. And that's full stop in Head Start. And so when we talk about, like when I was thinking and as everyone was talking, I was saying, the metaverse did work for us, right? To some degree. It didn't necessarily work with the instructional support for our children, but we have such a strong citywide Parent Policy Council, and the attendance is astounding because we were able to meet the need of still engaging with our parents in this virtual space, and that flexibility to be able to do that. Some of our programs are way up in the North Bronx or way out in South Brooklyn. The time that it would take for families to commute to our office, which is at 110 William Street, is valuable time lost, as opposed to taking the meeting while they're shifting from work, taking the meeting. We've had parents call us in the car, but that engagement with the community and that voice and that collective and making people feel valued has been such a key component of a lot of this work still going forward, even in the midst of, what we are calling this crisis. So thank you, Lisa, for raising that. I was bursting at the seams when you said that. And year before last, our Parent Policy Council was indeed led by a dad, and our current Policy Council we're not at 50-50, but we have such a large participation of dads in our Parent Policy Council that the conversations are so very different and inclusive in a lot of the narratives that are being set up in this space. So I appreciate you for raising that, Lisa. Thank you.
Wow, we're almost closing down on the final come in and try to land this plane, but there's so many different things that's come out of these conversations. I'm not too sure where we're going to go, but what we are going to try to do, we're going to try to close it out with some final thoughts about where we're at and where we should be going to. Once again, trying to get back into the flow of life, and how do we do it? How do we do it for our children? How do we do it for ourselves? How do we make all these things get back to our regular lives that we need to do? So as we start winding down, Yvette, I'm going to start with you, maybe telling us some final thoughts of, what do you hope and what do you wish and that we're going to be able to try to tell our audience. I know we had some questions that came through. I didn't get to some of the questions that came through. But
well, no, actually, I asked that in the chat, and apparently we got a lot of attaboy, attagirl. Like, people are loving the conversation. So not that many questions, but more an affirmation. All the panelists are really hitting all the right notes and taking us where we need to go. Can I build on your wishes thing? So along with what you want people to wish and think about, if there's one practical thing that you would encourage people this fall to focus on or do or ask for or research or obtain, or get a booster for, whatever it might be, like, what's one practical thing that you think people should take action because it's going to help them enter a very powerful rest of the fall?
Starting with you, Yvette.
To answer that question, I think that the campaign to get people to take more boosters, because I really think that we're heading into another danger zone with the fall coming in the flu season and a lot of people not getting those extra boosters because of the variant. I think that we really have to campaign pretty hard, and starting in the after school programs, talking to the parents, to make sure that both parents are boosted and that they also talk to other parents, because again, like you said, we're heading into flu season. It's going to be cold. You're going to be back into close quarters with everybody and the variants that are coming out. And someone said that the president said that the variant was over. Which one were you listening to? Because Trump, I thought, was gone.
No, this was Biden. Biden said it today.
And that's scary. Okay. But yeah, we have to campaign hard to get people vaccinated and to make sure that people are covered for the winter season that's coming, because we're going right back into another cycle if we do not get ourselves vaccinated and boosted. And
Mike,
again, thank you.
Can I add, when you said booster, maybe even booster of what you need to do is for workforce also, and boosting yourself, preparing yourself. So, because Mike, when you said boost, I was thinking about boosting me either in work, either vaccination. How do we boost ourselves getting ready for for this fall coming up? Because we're right here. I think this is the first week of the fall. So, Ms. Butler, I go to you next.
Can she hear you?
I'm going to just indicate that, people need to be careful and mindful of their health, their mental stability, and also just to be cautiously optimistic. But they need to really be true to themselves, in anything that they in fact do, because that does in fact reflect, on the next generation that follows.
Thank you for that. We'll go to Tessa.
Thank you. Once again, this has been a really great and stimulating conversation. And it was just a pleasure to share this space with all of you amazing experts. And I would want to share with everyone, see your doctors, right? And because people have been so backed up on taking care of their health and behind. And I had the opportunity of seeing my primary care physician where she laid out, I want you to boost your booster. I want you to make sure you get your flu shot. And please make sure, that you get your pneumococcal, right? So we're talking about getting the pneumonia vaccine, especially for those people who are compromised and should think about having it. And she reminded me, at your age, young lady, did you get the shingles vaccine as well? And so all of these things reminding us that vaccines do work, and that there is science behind it. And I'm not a medical professional by any means, but I can tell you, I had shingles. I do not want to live through that again. So yes, I will make sure that I have all my vaccines, that I'm boosted, but I will be seeing my doctors and all my specialists and taking care of my health. Thank you.
Roberto, yep.
Thank you. So first, I want to just encourage folks to continue to have some just understanding and hold grace for folks as we continue to come out of the continue to roar through the pandemic, right? And as the restrictions continue to be lifted, right, we see that some people may not be comfortable with restrictions being lifted, right? So just have some compassion for folks, right? So that's the first thing that I want to encourage folks to do. The second thing is, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say this, right, is I'm a youth services employee, right, a campus program manager, is that I'm encouraging anybody listening to continue to enroll either your child, your cousin, anybody into your local after school program, your Beacon program, your Cornerstone program, any of our DYCD services. The school year has just started, and so please, if any child that you know needs a safe haven, please continue. Just enroll, find a program. There's somewhere for your child to go, and so you can go on to discover dycd.dycdconnect.nycd, and you can find a program for your child to go to.
Thank you for that plug. Dr. Simba?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the rich conversation. Remember that health is not just the absence of disease. So I don't feel sick doesn't mean that you're healthy. Health is complete physical, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. So let's remember not to wait until we're sick to take appropriate precautions. We have heard about the importance of vaccines, but in addition to vaccines, there are other ways to stay healthy. What we eat, the air we breathe in, how much exercise we do, how much relaxation we get, how much social interaction we have. So let's remember to look out for each other, check up on someone, show up in a school and be the father figure for a young person. Let's be gracious to each other. Let's be kind. All of these things impact our health. Social capital, having a social network, impacts how long we live. Loneliness takes as much of a toll on our health as smoking 20 sticks of cigarette. So demystifying health, let us remember all of these things as we head into fall, and let's look out for one another as we do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Clement? Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the conversation, everybody. It was fantastic. It was a really good time. Shout out to Roberto for always having work on the mind with the plug for DYCD. Enroll your children, people. Honestly, if I can have like one thing that I kind of put out there in the world, don't be afraid to ask for help. Doesn't make you weak, doesn't make you less than. It's literally you doing everything you need to do to be the strongest version of yourself. So if you feel like I'm just going to grin and bear it, you're literally only hurting yourself. You're hurting the people around you. You're hurting everybody. So please, please, please have the conversations. Don't be afraid. Get help if you need help. It will make you a better person. And, it's going to make everybody else happy, and including yourself. So go out there and do it. Thanks, everybody.
Lise Ford?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for this very rich conversation. As I said, as a bona fide daddy's girl, I am very dear to the barbershop. I just want to reiterate or put an exclamation mark on a lot of the nuggets that I heard tonight. And the first is definitely hold grace in this time and as we move forward. I love the conversation around the pods. Create your pod and maintain the collective. And when I say create the pod, I mean take inventory of what are all of your support systems, doctors, your childcare, all the things that you need to have a successful, healthy, all parts of you be safe and healthy. And so make sure you make a list of what those support systems are, and when there is a lack, find out who that needs to be to plug in that space. Also reiterating the health and safety of our children. Chancellor Banks, I love the campaign that he has right now where he is partnering with some of the students and talking about why you need to come back to school. We need to hang out in the cafeteria. That to be in school anyway, we already had our immunizations, right? And so getting another vaccine is just a part of that schedule. So please take that into consideration, make informed decisions, speak to your pediatricians. It's just the babies, the children, everyone needs to come back into the collective and be a part of our world. It's just how we survive. So thank you for all of that rich conversation tonight. I implore our fathers and male figures to continue to do the great work that you've been doing. We need you. And so even when it's tough, I know that we have your back and keep pressing forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. White?
I want to thank you guys for having me. I love this. I love the conversation. It was rich, and I really want to really just thank you all. I got a lot of nuggets, even as we was giving nuggets, I got nuggets as well. The thing I think that I want to just echo is this idea of still creating community. I think it's getting dark, right? As the nights get darker, people get more depressed. There's a correlation with winter and depression and the less sunlight. So I think I heard a lot about physical health, mental health is so key. The collective is so key. Reaching out and making those connections, not just for, this idea, because somebody put in there about pandemic trauma, stress experience. So I wanted to kind of highlight really thinking about this connection with people. Whether you are afraid of being connected with people physically, you still need to reach out. Whether it's via phone, and you need to do some FaceTime. But there is lots of documentation and research for therapists that phone does help. It creates a level of intimacy, so you don't always have to be seen, right? So I think it's imperative that we're creating this collective for mental health, for support, to find advice around all these other things where we're talking about quietly quitting. I think you need to reach out. Your group should look varied. Your group should be made up of people who are older than you, who are younger than you, who are your peers. I feel like that's something that's missed. It should be people who are, able to give you some real information and varied information so you can make some decisions, right? Make some and getting different ideas. So I think that it's so important that we have that pod, but community. I love that idea of a collective community. So to me, that's really strong. I'm thinking about that's what's sitting with me right now in my spirit. Thank you guys for having me. And I'm a daddy's girl, granddaddy's girl. So I got taken to school by my granddaddy, and my daddy always took me out. So he's always in my mind. He's right here in front of me as I look at him. I miss him dearly. So thank you all, and all you fathers out here. Keep up the work.
Big brother Rod?
So thank you for that, Ms. White. I'm a girl dad. I have the little girls and the guys, but the girls, we talk about the guys all the time. But if you have a girl, you know what that means. It's a whole special thing. But I also want to connect with your spirit to say that community is important, right? Yeah, and that we should all be the best that we can be in the space that we are currently at. I promise not to outwork Scott, and Scott won't try to outwork me, and Lisa, I won't try to outwork you. We're going to lift each other up, and we're going to support each other in the different things that we all do well. And so certainly for many of us who are in the mental health field, we understand that the key to the work is relationship, genuine and authentic relationships. And as you were saying, Sister White, we have to remember that New York City is a complex and diverse place that we live in, right? And we want to, this is not just, the fathers conversation is not just for Black fathers or brown fathers. Our communities have Bengali and African and, just a variety, Italian. Everybody ought to be able to celebrate their own nationality in the space that they're in. The core value sets are pretty much the same. And so as you were talking, I thought of, when we talk to our men, Scott, we're looking at a diverse group of guys all the time. We're looking at the white hair guy over in the corner, and we're looking at the brand new dad, and the experience that those two people bring to a conversation is incredible. So, we're bringing the old to the new and the new to the old. You're not going to be able to pay me tonight in Bitcoin, but I'll listen to you. I'll listen to you, right? So this was good. Thank you for having me on the Barbershop. Mike, it's always good to see you. Call me back. These are crucial conversations that we're not going to be able to do without.
And Dr. Ramirez, you've been dropping gems and bombs and all those stuff. So I'm gonna let you be the, be the last one because we everybody go get your paper and pencil real quickly because she's gonna drop another jewel before we leave out. So
I appreciate that. I have a hard cosign with everybody. If there's one thing that I've learned in this pandemic is that white supremacy will destroy us. And the only way that we can fight back is by being in community and supporting each other. That's one thing that white supremacy does not have. We have that, and we have the power to do that. So I think for me, it's a finding liberatory and abolitionist spaces and empowering our community. I think that people want to be in social movements and have change and are tired of being oppressed by these systems. And so having this time, I've seen how people are ready to like make that change and hone in on their power and love on each other. And I think sometimes we forget that, but if love and compassion are at the center, we can take over the world. So I hope we hold that true and we uplift our youth, because boy, do they have some powerful things to tell us, and we can learn from them any time of day.
thank you for that. And with that said, I want to make sure everybody out there knows that we have a survey that anyone in New York over the age of, I believe, 14 can take. We have a UR code that we're going to put up, try to get up right now, that we want everyone to try to take this. And all of our panelists, please, if you haven't, go in the chat. You know, it takes about 10 minutes to do the survey. This is how we can make change in New York City and make change in in things that are happening. We're trying to find out the best way, and we want to be able to serve our New Yorkers the best we can. And by taking this survey, this is the opportunity that you can make your decisions or your ideas known. What is that you want? What are some changes that you'd like to see? How can we better affect the community overall by taking this survey and letting us know so that we can move the city dollars into the places and services that the community really, really wants? So I encourage everybody to take this link, pass it on, pass it to your friends, your networks, your students that are in school or over age of 14 to take this survey, your religious houses of worships, wherever you go. Please get this out. We need this information back. If we're going to make a difference in New York, here's an opportunity that we can make a difference by finding out. Please take this survey right now. Right after this, just take a picture of it on your iPhone or your Android, click it, go to the survey. 10 minutes is done, and you have spoken your piece. So, Mike, as we wind up, I don't know if anything else you want to add to the survey, Mike. Try to give it my best, but
No, thank you guys for putting it on the screen. I think David also put it in the chat on YouTube. You said it. You can do it in under 10 minutes. We want every New Yorker who hears this to take the survey. And the more we know about what are the highest priority needs in your particular neighborhood, the better we can position and work with all of our colleagues in the nonprofit sector to try to address those needs. So yeah, it's important. We're going to keep reminding you, and we want to hear from everyone.
so final thoughts, Mike. It was another successful barbershop. We had a
Yeah,
big panelist.
I learned a lot, and the conversation as it unfolded ended up being a lot different than I think I thought it was going to be. You know, I'm glad that we talked a lot in the beginning about where we left off and where we are now in terms of the pandemic, you know, and masking and spatial distancing and respecting one another. But we spent a lot of time talking about community building. And I think that that's really important. And we spent a lot of time talking about keeping ourselves well, you know, our physical and our mental well-being. And I think that that's super important. You know, there was a lot of gems. I mean, talking about dismantling white supremacy, there's a lot of gems just in the last 10 minutes, right? But one of the earlier gems to me was when we talk about self-care, we're not just talking about, you know, run yourself a bubble bath, you know, and once in a while a bubble bath is cool, but it's like, it's all these other things that it can mean. You know, Scott, you talk about this a few times, like when they say when you're getting on the airplane, put the mask on yourself first before you put it on your child. Like, you got to be able to take care of yourself to be in a position to do some of the stuff that we talked about. being a great dad, being a great mom, being a great community elder, a stakeholder, and reaching out and being a resource to other people in your community. You got to be able to take care of yourself in order to do that. And sometimes we have to ask for help. So some of the stuff that Clemente and others were talking about too, like it's okay to ask for help. That's what this is all about too. It's having these conversations and not being expected. What is it that Rodney said earlier? I don't have to outdo you. You don't have to outdo me. But if I do my part and you do your part and we remain in communication with each other, there's a lot of ground we can cover together. So there's a lot of nuggets that I walk away from this evening. I want to thank everyone for their contributions to making this conversation what it ended up being. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I was surprised. The only thing that I thought that was going to come up in the conversation, and I really don't want to jinx it, and we're not getting to the next half hour of this, but school safety. A lot of people are talking about, what's happening, all the things that happened toward the end of the last of school year with safety and active shooter trainings and things like that. I know we can go. That could be an whole other section just by itself, but I was surprised that we didn't tie that in. But
Well,
it's not
it's
only
funny you
just
should
in.
mention that.
Yeah,
Why
it's
don't
Funny
not
we
you
only.
should
charge
mention that,
people
right?
right
Yeah.
before we sign off? Or in the chat, if you're listening and you have questions or comments or things that you would want raised, why don't you shoot us an email and we'll be back. And I don't want to declare exactly when, but that topic warrants its own 2-hour discussion. Now, we have talked internally about trying to focus on that. So I think before the end of the calendar year, we'll want to come back and spend a lot of time on that.
So once again, because that is with our young people going back, that's still always back here in the back of our minds. What happens with that. And I know we talk about white supremacy. Like what happened up in Buffalo, and it's coming closer and closer to New York City, even though we haven't really had it fully. But when we think about it, and I'll probably get in trouble for this, but I know there was a threat by a politician who an old politician not around, kind of threatened New York and said, if you thought that day was bad, if New York doesn't straighten up, it could come to New York. But so I'll just leave it at that. If you hadn't heard about it, don't worry about it. But we have to worry about that. And even just going back into the job force, that how because of mental health and things like that, that people may be stressed out. And if we're not taking care of our employees well, what does that mean? Are we going to have this in the workplace? But hopefully we don't happen. But part of one of the final things I want to say is that words matter. And one thing that we said, especially with young people, words matter. We can stunt the growth of our young people very early in life just by the words that we say to them. There was a story that I heard recently about an elephant, and the person was at a circus and asked the trainer, says, can't that elephant knock down trees? Can't it push cars away? Can't that elephant pick up tonnage of work? How do you keep that elephant tethered to a piece of wood and a rope around his ankle? And they said because when the elephant was younger, we tethered the elephant with a chain around their ankle to a cement block. And the little elephant could not pull itself away from that block of cement that was in the ground. But the elephant learned that just the feeling of this thing around my ankle means I can't do it. They said, wow. So as a trainer, what do you worry about? Do you ever worry that this elephant may realize one day that they do have the power to break that rope? And he says, very much so. And we hope the elephant never learns that they're stronger than the rope around their ankle. So words matter. That what we're doing, especially with our young people, we have to be careful and be positive of saying the right things, pushing them in the positive direction, and making things happen that can grow them instead of stunting their growth. With this, I'm saying we're going to wind up. We're going to get out of here. We're working on our next piece. The next month is DV month. We're going to be talking about people harming people or people hurting people. We're going to be doing that. So if you have some information, things like that, we'd like to get some people with that. We're working on our panelist group together with that. And then the following month on that, we have some special guests that are going to come on. I'm not going to tell you yet because we're still working on it, but we have a special topic that we're working on now for our November barbershop. So please, once again, if you want to write to us, you can write at DYCD, or if you want to get it directly to us, to me, you can put it at fatherhood at DYC at NYC at DYCD at fatherhood at DYCD.gov, and that'll come directly to our fatherhood mailbox, and we can get your comments and your suggestions. With that said, would everyone be safe and get ready for the new fall? This is our first fall weekend. I think last summer Sunday was over last Sunday, a beautiful day. Time is going back. As it says, it's getting dark out there. And we want everyone to be safe until we come together again. With this said, see you, and make sure you take that survey. We need your information now. Dave?
Good night.
Have a great night, everybody.
Good night, y'all.
All the panelists, hold on for a second for music to fade out. Hold on.
DYCD Barbershop Talks. Fatherhood matters. Diverse. Hey yo, these is barbershop talks where the fathers pop off. Brag about relationships and argue about sports. Every topic's a favorite, is how we plot course toward changes. It all begins with dialogue and patience. Barbershop talk, so let's chop it up, boys. Barbershop talk, so let's chop it up, boys. Barbershop talk, so let's chop it up.